Businessman pretends to be a customer and discovers how employees are treated when he's not around. Harrison Reed was used to receiving praise about the excellence of his hotels, but in recent weeks, anonymous letters had been arriving at his office with disturbing accounts of how employees were treated when he wasn't present. Each letter brought specific details that left him uneasy and questioning whether he truly knew what went on in his own company. That was when he decided to do something he had never considered before: pretend to be an ordinary customer to find out the truth. That Tuesday morning, Harrison put on a simple shirt, a navy blue cap, and dark sunglasses, completely transforming his appearance. At 55, he ran one of the largest hotel chains in New England, but at that moment, he looked like just another tourist arriving at the Southern Star Resort, his flagship property in Aspen. "Good morning, I'd like a room for 3 nights, he told the receptionist, slightly changing the tone of his voice. The young woman behind the counter, who wore a dark blazer with a small name tag reading Maya, looked up and smiled professionally. She was at most 25, with brown hair pinned in a neat bun and an impeccable posture, although something in her eyes suggested fatigue. "Of course, sir. May I ask under what name the reservation will be made?" "John Miller," Harrison lied, using the first name that came to mind. While Maya typed at the computer, a man in a suit approached the counter with heavy steps. Harrison immediately recognized Douglas Vance, the hotel's general manager, a man in his early 40s who had been hired 6 months earlier for his excellent references. "Maya, what's taking so long? The customer doesn't have all day," Douglas shouted, slamming his hand on the counter. The young woman flinched, nearly knocking over a glass of water sitting next to the computer. "I'm sorry, Mr. Douglas. The system was a bit slow, but I've already managed to—" "Don't give me excuses. You always come up with some justification for your incompetence," he cut her off, raising his voice even more. Harrison felt his blood boil, but he forced himself to keep the composure of an ordinary customer. He watched as Maya trembled slightly, her fingers gripping the computer mouse more tightly. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked rapidly to hold them back. "Everything is ready, Mr. John. Room 312, with a mountain view," she said, handing over the key with a still trembling hand. "Thank you," Harrison replied, noticing how she tried to maintain her professionalism even after the public humiliation. Douglas turned to him with a forced smile. "I apologize for the inconvenience, sir. Some employees still need to learn how to provide quality service." "No problem," Harrison muttered, holding back the urge to confront the manager right then and there. As he headed toward the elevator, he heard Douglas say to Maya, "When your shift is over, I want you cleaning the ground floor restrooms. Maybe that will teach you to be quicker." Harrison clenched his fists inside his pockets. In his 20 years leading the company, he had never allowed employees to be treated that way. The anonymous letters hadn't been exaggerating. In the room, he sat on the bed and tried to process what he had witnessed. Maya seemed to be a dedicated employee, yet she was being humiliated over a minor system error. Worse still, Douglas had used a tone that made it clear this wasn't an isolated case. He decided to go down to dinner at the hotel restaurant and observe more. During dinner, Harrison noticed that Maya was still at the front desk, even after her regular working hours. An older housekeeper, who must have been around 60, approached his table to clear the dishes. "Sorry to bother you, sir, but I noticed you seem a bit worried," she said with a warm smile. "Actually, I'm just observing. That front desk clerk over there seems to be working well past her shift." The housekeeper, whose name tag read Mrs. Dorothy, sighed and glanced around before leaning in slightly. "Maya's a hard-working girl, bless her heart. She supports her mother, who's dealing with health problems. Mr. Douglas, well, he isn't very understanding with the staff." "What do you mean?" "Look, I probably shouldn't be saying this, but I've worked here for 15 years, and I've never seen a manager treat employees the way he does. Maya is his favorite target, and you know why? Because she's the only one who won't go along with certain propositions." Harrison raised his eyebrows, pretending not to understand. "What kind of propositions?" "Mrs." Dorothy glanced around again, clearly nervous. "He charges the staff a monthly fee. Says it's for an emergency fund, but that money never makes its way back to us. Whoever doesn't pay, he makes their life miserable." Maya refuses to give him money, so she gets punished every day. And no one reports him to management? Maya already tried. She wrote several letters to the hotel owner, but they never reached him. Douglas intercepts everything. Besides, he's the nephew of one of the investors, so he feels untouchable. Harrison felt a mix of anger and disappointment. Not only was Douglas abusing the staff, but he was also preventing complaints from reaching him. The anonymous letters now made sense. Someone had found a way to get around Douglas's system. "You seem like a good person," Mrs. Dorothy continued. "If you see something wrong, maybe you could help somehow. Maya writes everything down in a little notebook, you know. Every time he humiliates her or a co-worker, she's hoping that one day someone will actually listen. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and hit that like button and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out since we're just getting started. Now, continuing on. That night, Harrison barely got any sleep. He got up early and went downstairs to have breakfast at the restaurant, determined to get a closer look at the dynamic between Douglas and the staff. Maya was back at the front desk, this time with noticeable dark circles under her eyes. "Good morning," he greeted, approaching the counter. "Good morning, Mr. John. How did you sleep?" "Well, thank you. And you?" "You look tired." Maya smiled sadly. "I didn't sleep much. My mother had an episode in the middle of the night and I had to take her to the hospital." "Oh no, I hope everything's all right." "She has diabetes and high blood pressure. Sometimes the medications stop working," and she stopped abruptly when Douglas appeared. "Maya, what's all this idle chatter? A guest isn't here to hear your personal problems." "I'm sorry, Mr. Douglas. Mr. John just asked how I was doing." "And you're supposed to say, 'Fine, thank you,' and that's it. No need to tell him your whole life story. Go organize the brochures over in that corner. They're a mess." Harrison watched Maya walk away with her head down. Douglas turned to him with that same fake smile as always. "My apologies again, Mr. John. Some employees just don't know how to maintain professional boundaries." "Actually, I thought she was very polite," Harrison replied dryly. Douglas seemed taken aback by the response, but said nothing. Harrison took the opportunity to observe the hotel's activity throughout the morning. Before long, he witnessed Douglas humiliating other employees. He yelled at a waiter for being slow with the coffee service, criticized a housekeeper for finding a strand of hair in one of the rooms, and threatened a maintenance worker with termination for taking 5 extra minutes on his break. Around 10 in the morning, Harrison saw Maya leaving through the back of the hotel. He decided to discreetly follow her. She headed to a small nearby square and sat on a bench, pulling a sandwich out of a plastic bag. Harrison approached. "May I sit down?" She looked up, surprised to see the guest. "Of course, Mr. John. Sorry to be curious, but I noticed you seem to be going through a tough time." Maya hesitated before answering. "It's just that I've worked at the hotel for 2 years and I've always loved my profession. I studied tourism and hospitality in college, always dreamed of growing in the field. But ever since Mr. Douglas arrived, everything changed." "What do you mean?" She looked around, checking that no one she knew was nearby. "He created a system where employees have to pay him a monthly fee. He says it's for an emergency fund, but we've never seen that money used to help anyone. I refuse to pay, so he hounds me every day." "And have you tried reporting this?" "Several times. I wrote letters to the hotel management, but they never reached their destination. Douglas has access to everything. I also tried calling the company headquarters directly, but they said all complaints have to go through the local manager first." Harrison felt his chest tighten. His own complaint system was being used against the employees. "What about the other employees? Don't they support you?" "They're afraid. Most pay the fee because they need their jobs. Mrs. Dorothy, the most experienced housekeeper, supports me, but she's about to retire and doesn't want any trouble. The others, well, they know that if they defend me, they'll become targets too." "And have you thought about finding another job?" Maya sighed deeply. "I'm the sole breadwinner in my household. My mother is sick and can't work. My father abandoned us when I was a child. This is the only full-benefit contract job I could find in the area. Besides, I truly love hospitality. I don't want to give up my dream because of an abusive manager." You said you write everything down in a notebook. Maya stared at him, surprised. How do you know that? The housekeeper mentioned it yesterday. She said you document the abuses. Yes. She took a small notebook out of her purse. I write down the date, time, witnesses, exactly what he did or said. I'm hoping that one day it might be useful. Harrison quickly flipped through the pages and was shocked by the number of situations recorded. Humiliations, threats, improper charges, schedule changes without notice, disproportionate punishments. There were more than 100 entries in just 6 months. Can I take pictures of a few pages? He asked, pulling out his phone. What for? Well, maybe I know someone who can help. I have some contacts in the hotel industry. Maya hesitated, but eventually agreed. Harrison photographed several pages, feeling his outrage grow with every line he read. Douglas wasn't just a strict manager. He was a true tormentor who had turned the workplace into a nightmare. Have you thought about seeing a lawyer? He asked. With what money? I can barely afford my mother's medication. Besides, as you saw, Mr. Douglas has protection. He's the nephew of Mr. Arthur Vance, who is one of the hotel's investors. They say he's the one who got Douglas the job. Harrison knew Arthur Vance, a 60-year-old man who had invested in the company 5 years earlier. He had always seemed honorable, but now it was clear there was a conflict of interest he hadn't noticed. Maya, I want you to have hope. Sometimes things change when we least expect them. Thank you, Mr. John, you're very kind. I'm not used to guests who care about us as people. When they got back to the hotel, Harrison saw Douglas waiting at the front desk with a scowl on his face. Maya, where were you? Your break ended 10 minutes ago. I'm sorry, Mr. Douglas, I don't want excuses. Starting tomorrow, you'll work from 6 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, and I won't tolerate tardiness. But, sir, I always work from 8 to 4. There's no way I can get here by 6. The first bus doesn't come until 7. Then find another way to get here, or accept that you're not fit for this job. Harrison intervened. Excuse me, but I was the one talking to Maya. It was my fault she was late. Douglas stared at him, annoyed. That's very kind of you to take responsibility, but employees need to learn to separate work from their social lives. I was just asking for tourist information. She was very helpful. Douglas muttered something and walked away, but Harrison could see the anger in his eyes. It was clear Maya would pay for that interference later. During lunch, Harrison watched Douglas force Maya to wait tables in the restaurant, a job that wasn't hers. She tried to balance trays while still handling the front desk, clearly overwhelmed. At one point, she stumbled and nearly dropped a tray of drinks. Look at that! You're not even good enough to be a waitress, Douglas shouted in front of all the customers. An elderly woman eating nearby stood up, outraged. Young man, that's no way to treat an employee. This girl is trying her best. Douglas completely ignored her and kept humiliating Maya. Go to the locker room and pull yourself together. You're making a fool of yourself in front of the guests. Maya ran off, clearly fighting back tears. Harrison waited a few minutes and discreetly followed her. He found her in the employee's restroom, sobbing with her hands covering her face. Maya? She turned, trying to hide her tears. Mr. John, I'm sorry, I shouldn't. Don't apologize. Anyone in your position would be crying. I can't take it anymore, she spilled out. I wake up every day with a knot in my stomach, wondering what kind of humiliation I'm going to face. I've thought about quitting so many times, but I can't. My mother depends on me. What if I told you there might be a light at the end of the tunnel? What do you mean? Sometimes, when we document injustices like you've been doing, that information ends up in the right hands. It may take time, but justice has a way of prevailing. Maya looked at him with a mix of hope and skepticism. Do you really believe that? I do. And you should too. Keep documenting everything. Keep being the person of integrity that you are. Change happens when we least expect it. That afternoon, Harrison witnessed more abuse. Douglas humiliated a waiter who spilled coffee on a table, forced a housekeeper to redo a room 3 times that was already spotless, and threatened to fire a night receptionist because he had given a guest a discount without checking first. That evening, Harrison dined at the restaurant again and noticed the tense atmosphere. The staff was walking on eggshells, clearly afraid. Maya had been forced to work late again, this time organizing files in Douglas's office. Around 11 at night, Harrison decided to take a walk through the hotel corridors. As he passed the administrative office, he heard raised voices. He recognized Douglas's voice and Maya's. "You're going to pay like everyone else," Douglas was saying. "I already told you I'm not paying that bogus fee," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the fear. "Then you'll face the consequences. Tomorrow you'll work from 5 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, and then from 6 to 11 at night." "That's impossible. That's almost 16 hours of work. You should have thought about that before being stubborn." Harrison felt the urge to barge in and confront Douglas right then, but he knew that would compromise his investigation. He needed more evidence before making a move. The next day, he arrived early at the front desk and found Maya looking even worse. He had deep, dark circles under his eyes, and his hands trembled slightly. "Good morning," he said, approaching the front desk. "Good morning, Mr. John." "Maya, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course. Have you ever thought about traveling somewhere else, maybe even studying abroad?" Her face lit up for a moment. "Actually, I won a scholarship to take an international hospitality course in London, but... Mr. Douglas found out and said that if I accept the scholarship, he'll make sure I never work in the hospitality industry in the United States again. He has contacts at several companies." Harrison felt his blood boil. Douglas wasn't just abusing employees, he was also sabotaging their chances of professional growth. "And you believe that threat?" "He's done it to other employees before. Samantha, who used to work here, got an opportunity at a luxury hotel in New York City. Mr. Douglas called them and made up a story that she had stolen money. She lost the position, and to this day she hasn't been able to find another job in the field." "That's terrible. That's why I'm afraid to accept the scholarship. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but what if he actually manages to hurt me? I wouldn't have any way to support my mother if I ended up unemployed." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. During lunch, Harrison saw Douglas charging other employees in the back break room. The manager had created a full-blown extortion scheme, and everyone paid out of fear. Mrs. Dorothy approached his table. "You've been observing our routine a lot," she said, picking up the plates. "I'm just impressed by the dynamic of the place. You seem like an influential person. Couldn't you do something?" "What do you mean?" "Well, maybe you know someone in upper management, or some journalist, anything that could help these kids." Harrison pretended to think. "Maybe I can make a few calls. Do you know any other employees who would be willing to talk?" "Most of them are afraid, but I think if there were a guarantee that they wouldn't be harmed, Maya would certainly speak up. She's the bravest of us all." That afternoon, Harrison decided to test Douglas. He pretended to be dissatisfied with the service and asked to speak with the manager. "Mr. John, how can I help you?" asked Douglas with his fake smile. "I'm a bit disappointed with some aspects of the hotel." "What aspects?" "Well, yesterday I witnessed you yelling at an employee in front of other guests. I found it very inappropriate." Douglas's smile disappeared. "Are you referring to the situation with Maya?" "Unfortunately, some employees need a firmer approach." "Firm?" That looked like public humiliation. "Mr. John, with all due respect, every company has its management methods. We maintain high standards of quality here." "By yelling at employees in front of customers?" Douglas was visibly starting to get irritated. "If you're not satisfied with our methods, maybe another hotel would be more suited to your preferences." "Interesting. Are you suggesting I leave because I questioned how employees are treated?" "I'm suggesting that every establishment has its own organizational culture." Harrison let the matter drop, but he had confirmed his suspicions. Douglas was arrogant and felt untouchable. That night, after most of the employees had gone home, Harrison saw Maya still working. She was alone at the front desk organizing papers with an exhausted expression. He approached. "Still working?" Mr. Douglas said I have to finish the monthly report today. It's almost 200 pages. And is that your responsibility? No, it's normally the administrative supervisor's. But she's on vacation and he said I have to take on her responsibilities without getting paid any extra for it. Maya, can I ask you a question? If you could change one thing about this hotel, what would it be? She stopped typing and looked at him. Honestly, I wish people were treated with dignity, that employees could work without fear of being humiliated every day, that justice existed. And what if I told you that might be possible? What do you mean? Sometimes situations change faster than we imagine, especially when there are people documenting injustices like you do. You talk as if you know something. Harrison smiled mysteriously. Let's just say I have faith in justice. The next day, Harrison woke up with an idea. He decided to provoke a situation that would force Douglas to show his true face in front of more witnesses. During breakfast, he pretended to have found a problem with the restaurant bill. "Excuse me, but I think there's been a mistake on my bill," he said to Maya. "Let me check, Mr. John." Douglas appeared immediately. "What's the problem?" "It seems I've been charged for items I didn't consume." Douglas looked at the bill quickly. "I don't see any mistake here." "Well, I didn't order champagne, but it's on the bill." "Maya, did you write down champagne for Mr. John?" "No, Mr. Douglas. He only ordered orange juice." "Then why is it on the bill?" "I don't know, maybe it was a system error." "System error?" Douglas exploded. "This is your incompetence. You can't even write down an order correctly." "But Mr. Douglas, I'm sure I only wrote down juice." "Don't talk back to me. You're going to pay the difference out of your own salary." Several guests stopped to watch the scene. An elderly lady approached. "Young man, I was at the next table, and I can confirm that this girl only wrote down orange juice. It's not fair to blame her for a mistake that clearly wasn't hers." Douglas completely ignored her. "Maya, go to the office. We're going to have a serious conversation about your incompetence." "Actually," Harrison intervened, "I'm the one who made the mistake. I had champagne last night and forgot. The bill is correct." Douglas seemed annoyed at having lost the opportunity to punish Maya, but he could no longer keep shouting. "Well, next time be more careful before making accusations," he muttered. Harrison watched Maya head toward the bathroom, clearly shaken by yet another public humiliation. He decided he had seen enough. It was time to act. That afternoon, Harrison pretended to have an emergency and said he needed to leave early. In reality, he went straight to the company's head office in New York City. He had gathered enough evidence, and it was time to confront Arthur Vance. "Harrison, what a surprise to see you here," Arthur said when he received him in his private office. "Arthur, we need to talk about your nephew." "Douglas? What about him?" Harrison showed the photos from Maya's notebook, told him everything he had witnessed, and played the recordings he had discreetly made. "That's impossible," Arthur said, pale. "Douglas has always been a responsible young man." "Arthur, he's extorting employees, humiliating people publicly, and sabotaging the careers of anyone who tries to grow professionally. This is happening in my hotel, under my responsibility." "But Harrison, are you sure that—" "I saw everything with my own eyes. I pretended to be a guest for 3 days and witnessed more abuse than you can imagine." Arthur ran his hands over his face, clearly shaken. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to understand that I can't tolerate this any longer. Douglas is going to be fired tomorrow, and if you don't agree, I'll buy back your shares and you're out of the partnership." "Harrison, he's my nephew." "And those people are my employees. They're human beings who deserve dignity and respect. I won't allow them to be psychologically tortured because of nepotism." Arthur remained silent for several minutes. "You're right," he said finally. "I didn't know any of this, but I can't turn a blind eye now that I do. Douglas will be fired, and I take full responsibility for having put him there." "Great. Tomorrow I'll return to the hotel, and we'll do this the right way." The following morning, Harrison arrived at the hotel at 6 o'clock, knowing that Maya had been forced to start earlier. He found her at the front desk, looking even more exhausted than in previous days. "Mr. John, I thought you had left yesterday." "I changed my mind. Actually, I'm waiting for someone to arrive." "Someone?" "Yes, someone very important. Around 8 o'clock, Douglas arrived accompanied by Arthur and two other people Maya didn't recognize. Harrison got up from the armchair where he'd been waiting and walked toward the group. "Douglas," said Harrison, removing his sunglasses and cap. Douglas looked at him confused for a moment, then his eyes widened in shock. Mr. Harrison Reed?" "Exactly. Owner of this hotel chain, and your now former boss." Silence took over the lobby. Maya, who was behind the counter, stood frozen. Mrs. Dorothy, who was passing by with a cleaning cart, stopped in her tracks. Other employees began to gather, curious about what was happening. "Mr. Harrison, I can explain," Douglas began, but was interrupted. "There's nothing to explain, Douglas. I spent the last 3 days pretending to be a guest and I saw everything. Absolutely everything." Douglas looked at Arthur for support, but his uncle looked away. I was just maintaining discipline." "Discipline?" Harrison raised his voice. "You call it discipline to extort employees, humiliate them publicly and sabotage their careers? I never extorted anyone." "No?" Harrison took out his phone and started playing a recording. Douglas's voice echoed through the lobby. "You're going to pay like everyone else." Douglas went pale. "Every employee you force to pay your improper fee will be reimbursed. Every single one," Harrison continued. "And as for the psychological abuse, that ends now." "Mr. Harrison, please, I need this job. I have a family." "Funny, you never cared when employees said the same thing to you." Harrison turned to Maya, who was still too shocked to react. "Maya, can you come here, please?" She came out from behind the counter with hesitant steps. "I want everyone to know that Maya was the brave person who wrote the anonymous letters that alerted me to what was happening here." "Her!" Douglas exploded. "I knew this, but watch your next words." Harrison interrupted with a threatening tone. "You've already caused enough damage." Harrison turned to Maya. "I'd like to offer you a promotion. Will you accept the position of Human Training and Development Supervisor? With a salary 3 times your current one and complete freedom to implement employee wellness policies." Maya began to cry, but this time they were tears of relief and joy. I accept," she managed to say between sobs. "Great. And about that scholarship to London, the company will cover all your expenses and guarantee you an even better position when you return." Douglas tried one last time. "Mr. Harrison, I can change. Give me a second chance." "No. People like you don't change. They just get more careful not to get caught. You're fired for cause, and I'm going to make sure every hotel in the region knows exactly why." "That's unfair. My uncle is a partner in this company." Arthur finally spoke. "Was, Douglas. I'm also selling my shares back to Harrison. I can no longer be associated with something that allowed you to do what you did." Douglas left the hotel, watched by all the employees. Harrison turned to the group that had gathered in the lobby. "I want everyone to know that important changes are going to happen here. First, everyone who was forced to pay irregular fees will be fully reimbursed. Second, we're going to implement a new reporting system where any report will reach me directly, without intermediaries. Third, no employee will ever be punished for making legitimate reports." Mrs. Dorothy approached with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Harrison, thank you. Thank you for listening and for coming personally to check things out. In 15 years of work, I've never seen a boss do that. Mrs. Dorothy, you are the soul of this company. Without you, there would be no business at all. It's my obligation to make sure you're treated with the respect you deserve." In the following days, Harrison stayed at the hotel to implement the promised changes. Maya worked directly with him to develop new human resources policies. She showed impressive leadership ability, listening to each employee's needs and proposing practical solutions. "You know, Maya," said Harrison during one of their meetings, "I always knew that happy employees mean satisfied customers. But I had never fully understood how a single manager could destroy an entire work environment." "Mr. Harrison, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How did you know the letters were mine?" Harrison smiled. "Actually, I didn't, but when I started paying attention, it became clear that you were the only one with enough courage to fight the system, even knowing you'd face retaliation. I was so afraid of losing my job." And that's exactly why your courage was even more admirable. You risked your livelihood and your mother's to stand up for what was right. 2 weeks later, the hotel had completely transformed. The employees were genuinely smiling, the service had improved significantly, and guest reviews had shot up. Maya implemented weekly meetings where any employee could raise concerns or suggest improvements. "You know what impresses me the most?" said Harrison to Maya during one of those meetings. "You're not just working better, you're more creative, more proactive. Douglas wasn't just being cruel, he was wasting your potential." "It's because when you're not afraid you can focus on what really matters," she replied. A month after Douglas left, Harrison received an unexpected visit. It was Arthur Vance. "Harrison, I came to apologize in person and to bring a proposal." "What proposal?" "I'd like to invest in a training program for young people in the region, something that teaches not just hospitality, but above all ethical leadership. I want my money to be used to fix what my nephew broke." "That's an interesting idea. Maya could lead the project when she comes back from London. It would be a way to multiply what she learned and make sure other people don't go through what the employees here went through." Harrison considered the proposal. "I accept, but with one condition. The training center will operate inside the hotel. I want guests to see that we take the development of ethical professionals seriously." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. 3 months later, Maya was getting ready to travel to London. On her last day of work before the trip, she surprised Harrison with a revelation. "Mr. Harrison, I need to tell you something." "Go ahead." "I knew who you were from the very first day." Harrison stopped what he was doing and stared at her. "What do you mean?" "I recognized your voice when you spoke to me at the front desk. I had studied about the company in college and watched several of your interviews online. When you arrived in disguise, I knew right away." "And why didn't you say anything?" "Because I realized you were truly investigating. If I had told you I knew who you were, it might have changed Douglas's behavior or that of the other employees. You needed to see reality without filters. You're even smarter than I imagined. And there's more. I knew Douglas was intercepting the letters to management. That's why I started sending them by mail directly to the headquarters address I found online. That was a huge risk." "It was. But I believed that if the real owner of the company knew what was happening, he would do something about it. And I was right." Harrison was moved by the trust she had placed in him, even without knowing him personally. "Maya, when you return from London, I want you to take on a position in the company's national leadership, not just overseeing one hotel, but ensuring that what happened here never happens again anywhere. It would be an honor." On the day of Maya's trip, all the hotel employees gathered to say goodbye. Mrs. Dorothy had prepared a cake, and each person gave a short speech thanking her for having the courage to report the abuses. "Maya," said Mrs. Dorothy, "you saved all of us, not just from Douglas's abuses, but from the feeling of powerlessness we were carrying." "I just did what any decent person would do," replied Maya. "No," Harrison interjected, "not just anyone would have your courage. You risked everything for a principle, and that's rare." During the months Maya was studying in London, she kept regular contact with the hotel team. The project for the Institute of Professional Excellence was progressing, and new employees were always hired with a focus on ethical values as well as technical skills. Douglas, meanwhile, had difficulty finding another job in the field. When he landed a position as a front desk clerk at a small hotel, he discovered what it was like to be on the other side of the power dynamic. His new co-workers told him they had looked him up online and knew about his termination for abuse of authority. A year later, Maya returned from London transformed. Not only had she become an expert in international hospitality, but she had also studied organizational psychology and ethical leadership. On the day of her return, Harrison was waiting for her at the airport. "How was the experience?" he asked during the drive back. "Incredible. I learned that what was happening here isn't normal anywhere in the world. In well-managed hotels, employees are treated as partners, not as subordinates to be intimidated." And what do you plan to implement at the Institute? I want to create a program where young people learn not just hospitality techniques, but above all about empathetic leadership, nonviolent communication, and how to create healthy work environments. And what if someone like Douglas signs up for the course? Maya smiled. I have methods for identifying abusive profiles, and if someone like that signs up, I'll use them as an example of how not to lead. The grand opening of the Institute of Professional Excellence took place 3 months later. The event was attended by business leaders from across the region, journalists and representatives from other hotel chains. Maya gave the opening speech. 2 years ago, I was a frightened employee suffering daily abuse in the workplace. Today, I am the Director of Human Development for one of the largest hotel chains in the country. That transformation was only possible because someone believed that employees deserve dignity and that prosperous companies are built on foundations of mutual respect. The center started with 30 students, all young people from the region who couldn't afford a college education. Within 6 months, the waiting list had more than 200 names. You know what I'm most proud of? Harrison said to Maya during a visit to the center. It's not just the program's success, but the fact that we're creating a generation of professionals who will never accept or practice workplace abuse. And that's going to multiply. Everyone who comes through here will carry those values wherever they go to work. 2 years after the center's opening, Maya received an unexpected call. It was Douglas. Maya, I know I have no right to call you, but I need to talk. What do you want, Douglas? I want to apologize. It took a while, but I finally understood the harm I caused. Not just to you, but to every employee. And what changed your perspective? I went through situations similar to the ones I inflicted on others. I found out how humiliating it is to be treated without dignity. I'd like to know if there's any way I can make up for what I did. Maya was silent for a moment. Douglas, you can start by being genuinely respectful to the people around you, and if you ever find yourself in a leadership position again, remember how you felt when you were treated badly. Do you think I'll ever get a second chance? Everyone deserves a second chance, but you have to prove through actions, not words, that you've truly changed. 6 months later, Douglas enrolled in one of the courses at the Institute of Professional Excellence, not to change careers, but to learn about ethical leadership. Maya decided to accept his application, but placed him in a special program for people who had committed abuses in the past. Why are you giving me this opportunity? Douglas asked on the first day of class. Because I believe people can change, but only when they genuinely acknowledge their mistakes and commit to transformation. You're going to have to work much harder than the other students to prove you've changed. The special program included sessions where Douglas had to listen to accounts from people who had suffered workplace abuse, case studies on ethical leadership, and psychological counseling to understand the roots of his abusive behavior. The hardest thing, Douglas said during one of the sessions, is realizing that I became exactly the kind of boss I hated when I was an employee. I knew how bad it felt to be humiliated, yet I still did it to others. And why do you think you repeated that pattern? Asked the program's psychologist. I think because I believed intimidating people was synonymous with leadership. No one ever taught me better ways to motivate a team. 3 years after the events at the resort, Harrison decided to conduct a complete evaluation of all the branches in the chain. Maya had implemented the new management system in every hotel, and the results were impressive. A 40% increase in employee satisfaction, a 60% reduction in turnover, and a 25% growth in guest satisfaction. You know what this proves, Harrison said during the results presentation. That treating employees with dignity isn't just the morally right thing to do, it's also the best business strategy. And the best part, Maya added, is that we've created a model that other companies are now replicating. Several hotel chains have already reached out to us to implement similar programs. Mrs. Dorothy, who at 62 had been promoted to Employee Wellness Coordinator, was also at the meeting. You know what really changed, she said. People are no longer afraid to come to work. My grandchildren, who didn't want to pursue a career in hospitality because they thought it was a field where people were mistreated, are now taking an interest in the profession. That is what makes me most proud, Maya replied. We didn't just change a hotel. We changed the perception of an entire profession in the region. On the 5th anniversary of the hotel's transformation, a special celebration was organized. Former and current employees attended, along with alumni from the Institute of Professional Excellence, who now worked at other companies, and even some competitors who had implemented similar practices. During the celebration, Harrison gave an emotional speech. 5 years ago, I received anonymous letters that changed not only the lives of this hotel's employees, but also my perspective on leadership. I discovered that being a good business owner doesn't just mean generating profits, but also being responsible for the well-being of those who make those profits possible. Maya, now the National Director of Human Development for the company, also spoke. When I wrote those first letters, I was afraid of losing my job. Today I realize I was actually fighting to save not just my job, but my dignity and that of all my colleagues. And I discovered that when you fight for what's right, the universe conspires in your favor. Douglas, who had completed the rehabilitation program and now worked as a consultant in humanized management for small businesses, was also present. He approached Maya during the celebration. "Thank you for giving me a second chance," he said. "How are you feeling about the changes you've made?" "I'm doing well, but it's still a daily process. Every morning I wake up remembering that I have to be a better person than I was in the past. And when I see other managers mistreating their employees, I feel the urge to intervene." "And do you intervene?" "Yes, but in an educational way. I tell my story and explain how I changed. Some people listen, others don't, but at least I'm trying to make up for the harm I caused." During the celebration, Harrison announced a new initiative, the creation of a foundation that would offer scholarships to young people from low-income families interested in careers in hospitality, with a special focus on ethical leadership. "The Maya Sterling Foundation," he said to her surprise, "will ensure that young talent isn't lost due to lack of opportunity, and that they are educated with the values that transformed our company." Maya was too emotional to speak right away. When she composed herself, she said, "I don't know if I deserve to have my name on a foundation." "You do," Mrs. Dorothy interrupted. "You didn't just transform our reality. You became proof that an ordinary person can make extraordinary differences." "Furthermore," Harrison added, "I want future generations to know that great changes often begin with small acts of courage from people who seemingly have no power." 6 months later, the Maya Sterling Foundation had awarded its first 100 scholarships. The criteria weren't just financial need, but also demonstrated ethical values and a commitment to social justice. "You know what moves me most about the new scholarship recipients?" Maya said to Harrison during a visit to the Institute. "Many of them have been through situations of workplace abuse or watched family members go through them. They understand viscerally why we're doing this, and that ensures the values are passed on genuinely, not just theoretically." One of the first scholarship recipients was Caleb, a 19-year-old young man whose father had been fired in a humiliating way from a factory after questioning safety conditions. When I saw there was a program that taught not just professional skills, but mainly how to treat people with dignity, I knew that was what I wanted for my life, Caleb said during an interview with the local newspaper. "And what do you plan to do after you graduate?" the reporter asked. "I want to open my own business someday, but following the principles I'm learning here. I want to prove that it's possible to succeed without stepping on others." The story of the transformation of the Southern Star Resort reached the ears of university researchers who decided to do a case study on the impact of ethical leadership on business results. The study would be published in specialized journals and used in business administration courses. "It's ironic," commented Maya during an interview with the researchers. "What started as a terrible situation turned into a positive example for other companies." "And what would you say was the most important factor in the success of the transformation?" asked one of the researchers. "The courage of one person to speak the truth and the humility of a leader to listen and act. Without those two things, nothing would have changed." Harrison, who was also taking part in the interview, added, "And the recognition that happy employees are the best investment a company can make. When you treat people well, they naturally give their best." 7 years after the initial transformation, the Southern Star Resort was considered a national benchmark in people-centered management. It received visits from business owners from all over the country interested in learning about the practices implemented there. During one of those visits, a business owner from Utah asked Maya, "How do you manage to maintain these standards as the company grows? Isn't it harder to control the quality of treatment toward employees?" "Actually, it's the opposite," she replied. "When you create a genuine culture, it replicates itself. The employees themselves become guardians of the company's values." "And what if a manager with abusive tendencies shows up?" "They're identified quickly because they can't thrive in an environment where abuse isn't tolerated. It's like a natural antibody of the organization." Mrs. Dorothy, who was now about to retire, decided to write a book about her 15 years at the company, including the transformation she had witnessed. "I want my grandchildren and other young people to know that it's possible to change realities that seem impossible to change," she said during the launch of the book, titled Never Too Late for Justice. "And what was the greatest lesson you learned from all of this?" asked a young woman in the audience. "That staying silent in the face of injustice is being an accomplice to it, and that when good people come together, they can overcome any kind of oppression." Mrs. Dorothy's book became an unexpected success, especially among middle-aged working women who identified with her story. Many wrote letters recounting similar situations they had faced and thanking her for the inspiration. "You've become a symbol," Maya told her during an afternoon book signing. "No, dear, I've only become the voice of thousands of people who went through what I went through. The difference is that I was lucky enough to work with people like you and Mr. Guy Harrison, who did something about it." 8 years after the start of the transformation, Douglas sought out Maya again, this time to tell her that he had been invited to give a talk at a company about the dangers of workplace bullying. "They want me to tell my story as a former bully," he said. "Do you think I should accept?" "I think so, as long as you're completely honest about what you did and how it affected people." "I'm afraid of being publicly attacked." "Douglas, you caused a lot of suffering. It's natural that some people are angry with you. But if your experience can prevent others from making the same mistakes, it's worth facing it." Douglas's talk was an unexpected success. His brutal honesty about his own mistakes and the consequences of his actions moved the audience. "The hardest thing to accept," he said during the talk, "is that I destroyed the self-esteem of innocent people out of pure ego. I used to think that humiliating others made me seem more powerful, but in reality, it only revealed my own insecurity and lack of competence." After the talk, several people approached him to share their own experiences with abusive bosses. Some thanked him for having the courage to publicly admit his mistakes. "Do you know what impresses me most about your story?" said a manager from the audience. "It's that you didn't try to justify yourself or downplay what you did. That's rare. Because there's no justification for abuse. Period. Any attempt to explain would actually be a way of playing the victim, and I'm not a victim of anything. I was the tormentor." Douglas's talks became a regular thing, and he developed a specific program for managers on how to identify and correct abusive behaviors in themselves. "It's strange," he commented to Maya after one of his talks. "Now I'm more useful to society as a former abuser than I ever was as an abusive manager. Maybe that's your way of making up for the harm you caused, turning your negative experience into something that protects other people." "I hope so. I can't go back in time and undo what I did, but I can try to keep others from doing the same." 9 years after that initial transformation, Harrison decided it was time to gradually step away from the business. Maya, now 35, had become one of the most respected managers in the country's hospitality industry. "I want you to take over as president of the company," he said during a private conversation. "Harrison, I don't know if I'm ready for that much responsibility." "Maya, you didn't just transform this hotel. You transformed the entire American hospitality industry. Your work is cited in universities, replicated by competitors, and admired internationally. If you're not ready, nobody is. What if I make mistakes? You will, every leader does. The difference is that you have solid values and the humility to recognize when you're wrong and correct course." The presidential transition ceremony was held at the same hotel where it all began. Employees from every branch of the chain were present, along with representatives from other companies that had implemented similar practices. 10 years ago, Maya said in her inauguration speech, I was a desperate young front desk clerk writing anonymous letters because I didn't know how else to ask for help. Today, I take over the presidency of this company. That didn't happen because I'm special, but because I found people willing to listen and act in the name of justice. During the speech, she paused and looked at the audience. I want every young employee here to know, your voices matter, your rights matter. And if anyone tries to humiliate or exploit you, never accept it in silence. There will always be someone willing to listen, if you have the courage to speak. The audience rose to their feet in an emotional standing ovation. Mrs. Dorothy, now retired but present at the ceremony, had tears in her eyes. It's amazing to see how a bad situation can turn into something so beautiful, she commented to a colleague. End of the story. And you, dear listener, what did you think of this story of transformation and justice? Tell us in the comments which part moved you the most and whether you've experienced or know someone who has gone through similar situations at work. Your opinion means a lot to us. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories that will move you. Thank you for sticking with us this far.